Joel Klatt is now joining us, the voice of college football. Let's start with this, Joel. There was a report earlier today. It was done. It's over. That's not set in stone, right? That's not entirely accurate?
That's right. That is not entirely accurate. There have been some speculation that tonight's meeting will provide some finality to the decision. Most have expected that it will be a postponement and a planning towards the spring for the Big Ten conference schedule and football season, but nothing has been voted on. There has not been a vote, and nothing has been set into stone or official at this point.
So stars yesterday, some big stars came out and said, we are united, we want to play. Do you believe that, as a former college football player, do you believe players mostly do want to play?
Absolutely. I would put it somewhere. I've talked to, 6 or 7 different coaches, and all of them have taken straw polls amongst their team about, who wants to play, who's undecided, and who definitely does not. And what you're seeing right now is about 85 to 90% of the players will raise their hand and say, we want to play. There's usually about 1 to 3% of the players that say, we don't know, we need more information. And then somewhere just over 5% of the players, maybe just under 10% of the players that would just say, hey, we would rather opt out. So I think the overwhelming majority of football players are looking to their leaders, the administrators, their presidents, to provide them options in order to play this fall. And right now, it doesn't seem like that's happening. And I think that that's really frustrating a lot of these players, which is why you've seen this prominent push, in particular by Fields and Lawrence, who have become great leaders in this, to say, hey, listen, we want to play football, and we stand united together in that sentiment.
So why, in the course, Joy and I were talking about this, it was like, we have college football, they're making the schedules, okay, season's canceled. Like, what happened in the last 2 days? What is it?
Well, I think that, this might be a bad analogy, but, listen, you love analogies. So, my wife was in business-to-business sales when we first got married. She would sell copiers, right? And that's not an easy sale. You got to walk in and you got to find the decision maker. That was the key point when she walked into a business, was you got to find the decision maker. Anybody in sales knows exactly what I'm talking about. And I think what you're seeing right now is that the decision maker is finally at the table, and that's the president. So the coaches and the ADs and even the conference commissioners can talk all they want about their efforts and what they want to do from a planning perspective and the procedure perspective in order to play. But really, this lies with the university presidents. And as the decision makers get to the table, they're not being truthful, Colin. Okay, let's be very clear about what's going on. If they were actually concerned about the health and well-being of the student athlete, and the football player in this case, they would want to keep them within the structure, procedures, and protocols of a football season. Okay, what they're most concerned with right now is liability, and then right under that is the Players United front that has started to come up in terms of a unionization of the players. That's what's driving most of their decisions, the presidents. Liability, the ever-increasing plaintiff lawyer community it's frothing at the mouth to bring lawsuits against conferences and universities. And that's what the presidents are scared of right now, because the health and safety aspect, it's really not holding much water, because if you're going to put a player through testing protocols, have the medical care right there, even when things are being brought to the forefront, like these potential heart conditions that could be harmful in a long term, well, it'd be much better to know if you had the virus than to get the care needed right away with things like an EKG, rather than just going about your everyday life outside of football structure, not knowing if you had the disease, in particular if you were an asymptomatic case, potentially being in a multi-generational home, and not knowing if you did have that underlying heart condition. So it just doesn't hold water whatsoever that they would cancel the season in order to benefit the health and safety of the player. If they did that in the name of health and safety, they would actually be doing the exact opposite. And that's not even getting into the mental health aspects of potential substance abuse, the fact that this age group in America, the second leading cause of death in this age group, the college age group, is suicide. We're not talking about the loss of opportunity for tens of thousands of scholarships. I think that this decision would be the wrong decision, and it would be based out of fear of liability and the fear of player unionization.
I would watch spring football. I think it's doable. I do worry about spring football is really not in the spring. It'd be January, February, early March. That's flu season. If we don't have a vaccine, that's flu season. That's COVID. Flu is rough on kids. COVID rough on older people. You could just have a mess if we didn't have a vaccine. So I would watch it. I do think it could be problematic. What do you make of the suggestion of spring football?
Well, I think that let's just start with this. We know right now, the data suggests that the college age kid, and specifically a healthy kid, is under far greater danger from things like car accidents, homicide, suicide, heart disease, and even lightning strikes than they are from COVID. I would make an argument that trying to play a spring football season and doing to your body what a football season does, and then trying to back that up again with a fall season in 2021 would be more detrimental to the health of the player than trying to play this fall. So with that as the background, and I've told that to you before, with that as the background, if there are plans to move to the spring, I believe that it would have to be a reduced season, somewhere in the 6, 7, maybe max 8 game range. I think that it could happen. I think that it could be possible. One of the things that I've heard floated out there as an idea, and I can't take full credit because I heard it earlier today, but is you could make matchups that were more attractive, and it wouldn't have to necessarily be just playing within your conference. And so maybe we could get the USC Alabama, and maybe we could have Ohio State play, Georgia or something along those lines to increase the visibility and marketability of a spring season. But keep in mind, the players that have any option to go to the NFL will be out. So it will be virtually like a spring season for a preseason of 2021.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. If Alabama loses 6 or 7 guys, they're still Alabama. Their backups are better than 90% of college football starters. Finally, if I had to say guess today, Klatt, I still am 50-50 on the SEC. I think they're going to bulldoze their way through it. But, that's not informational. That's just opinion. If I said to you this morning, are we going to have college football? Who's going to play? Who's not?
I do believe that at least one, probably 2 conferences are going to stand firm and try to do this. And it's going to be led by the SEC. I think that the ACC will follow suit and try to get that done. And I think that the Big 12 might as well. And this is where it actually gets a little bit political, because at some point, these universities and maybe even conferences are going to look to the governors within their footprint, and they're going to say, listen, we're going to play if you're behind us. And we don't really care what the overarching governing bodies are telling us. So, for instance, like let's say that there is a school that their conference decides to cancel the season, right? And let's say it's in the Pac-12, one of the Arizona schools, maybe a Colorado, maybe a Utah, something like that. And Pac-12 says, like, no, we're not going to do this. And that school's governor says, I'm okay with you trying to play football. And they say, okay, we're going to go schedule games. I think it might be the Wild West in terms of that type of a model. But if I were to answer your question, I do think we will still have a conference, maybe 2, try to stand up and try to move forward in the fall. But it's going to be awfully hard if that first domino tonight falls with the Big Ten. Okay,
so I started my show today saying this. I've never figured out why college football doesn't have a commissioner. For years and years, I grew up with boxing. But boxing had promoters, all self-serving promoters trying to get rich. And then here came UFC, this young fledgling sport that had Dana White. So they had a centralized voice. And you could argue, I can watch a 30-year-old Muhammad Ali fight. I don't think I'd ever sit down and watch a 30-year-old UFC fight. So you can't tell me UFC rose simply because it's better. That's an argument. But it did rise because it had leadership, and really strong leadership, and boxing didn't. So the NFL's got a commissioner and a singular voice and a union leader. Why doesn't college football have like a president? It's a $2-3 billion a year sport. If they had a president and these guys were aligned, you'd have an actual plan. It's just not everybody fighting for themselves.
You're absolutely right. And preaching to the choir, I completely agree with you. I think that there needs to be an overarching governing body of college football. And I really believe, you make a great analogy, a sports analogy back to boxing versus UFC. I've made the analogy all the way back to our country's founding and after the Revolutionary War and before the Constitutional Convention. In that little, gap, we weren't a country. So you had all the states behaving in different ways, adhering to international law in different ways, and we needed the overarching governing body of a federal government in order to get that done. And it happened at the Constitutional Convention. We need a Constitutional Convention of college football because it is far too big and too important to allow to behave this way where everybody acts in their own benefit. And that's what we have right now with all the conferences doing whatever they deem necessary for their own good.
All right, the Klattster, Joel Klatt, great seeing you, buddy. He's always well appointed. He looks so professional. That's how you bring a real professional look to our show, and we certainly need it because once the camera goes off, Joy, it's cats and dogs living together on this set. Good seeing you, buddy.
See you, bud. Have a good day.
All right.